Hey folks, Randy here with Doing Cut and Trim. Black History Month is almost over, and every year I've wanted to do a video that kind of commemorates the month because I really enjoy history, and feel like Black American history is particularly interesting because I don't think it was very well taught to me when I went to school. And then I ended up, for my 4-year degree, going to a historically black college called Bowie State University. And part of going to that school is you're required to take a black history course. And I took you can either take 1865 and before, or you can do 1865 to present. I took 1865 to present. I wish I'd taken both. But in that class, you learn that, like, even what you do learn in school is just such a shallow understanding of everything that was going on, and that there's just so much more interesting things in history. And so I just always loved history. Anyway, I digress. But there was a Black history story I learned about recently that I wanted to pass on to you guys because it's awesome. It's the story of Robert Smalls. I'd never even heard of this guy until last year, 2020, when I picked up a book about him and read it. And this guy is an amazing story. And right before I did this, I was planning on saying in this video that they got to make a movie about this guy. It's an incredible story, and it turns out they actually are. Apparently, they're in the process of making a movie about him now. So hopefully it's a good movie. Because it's an amazing story. So I'll encourage you to pick up the book about Robert Smalls. It's called Be Free or Die, The Amazing Story of Robert Smalls' Escape from Slavery. And like, I'll just kind of give you a recap of what happened with this guy and encourage you to read the book because the story is so much more amazing than I could even give it justice. So Robert Smalls was born into slavery. I want to say in one of the Carolinas. I can't remember. I'm just going to do all this off of memory, and then I'll link to a video where I first heard about this guy, and I'll also link to the book. But he was born into slavery, and seemed like as far as he had a pretty typical childhood as far as kids that grow up into slavery are, but people noticed that he was definitely an above average kid. He stood out from everybody else. He seemed like he was a smarter guy. And I don't remember all the details, but he ended up working on boats. And he was very skilled and ended up being, I don't know what you would call it. Not that he wasn't a captain of a boat, but he steered it. He was very good at it. Yeah, he was incredible at it. That he was living his life, and as far as slaves go, it's a miserable existence, but like I guess he was able to sell his skills and like make money, not much, but he was able to make money, and he was able to work and keep a certain amount of it with the promise of being able to buy his freedom. I mean, the price that they were telling him was absurd. I don't think there's any way he was going to be able to buy his freedom with what they were saying he was going to have to pay and what he was making. But, he was able to work and make money, and he was working towards that. But there wasn't a real urgency. And then he got married. And then not too long after he got married, he and his wife had a baby. And Robert Smalls became very nervous, and terrified that that his family was going to get split up. He had seen it happen. He'd witnessed it happen. It might have even happened in his family. I don't remember. But he was scared that was going to happen to him, and he did not want that. And so he began considering what he could do, because even though I think the people that owned him said they weren't going to do that, if I remember correctly, but he didn't trust them because, you heard stuff like that before. People don't keep their promises. And so he was beginning to think about needing to escape and looking for the best way to do it. Almost dropped something on the camera. And so, the Civil War breaks out, and the South doesn't really have the naval capabilities that the North has, but they need them. So the South starts renting out ships. Robert Smalls is a very, very good, I believe he was a helmsman, I think is the word, but he was able to pilot a steamboat. And I believe it was a steamboat. I'm doing so much of this off of memory. And so he gets on the boat that he's tasked with driving, gets rented to the Confederate Army. And so because he's so good at what he's doing, and because of the quality of the boat that he has, he ends up working for the top guy at the base where where that boat is stationed. I don't remember what the place was, but it was a very fortified area. There was something like 6 checkpoints from like where the harbor was to get out into like the open sea. It was literally like 6 checkpoints. I mean, it was very difficult. You couldn't just go in and out. The Union Army couldn't just float in there. It was very tight and very difficult. And so Robert Smalls did his job, ferrying messages back and forth, things like that, ferrying the soldiers and high-level officials and all that. And he did such a good job and was so good at what he did that they grew to trust him, and they believed that he was a man of his word, that he did a good job, and they ended up trusting him, in hindsight, probably more than they would say they should have. So Robert Smalls he's devising a method, but he's also watching the actual captain of the boat. And the captain has this, I believe, straw hat that he wears. And so Robert Smalls is focusing on everything, and he devises a plan, and he goes to the other slaves that are crewing this ship and says, I got a plan for escape. You guys want to come with me? And they all said yes. There was one guy who wasn't so confident that he wanted to go because it was very risky. I mean, if it doesn't work, you're all dead, and your families are probably going too. And so there was one guy that didn't want to, but they kind of said, like, look, dude, you're either coming with us or we're going to kill you because we can't trust you. So he agrees. And so they devised this plan where they had a certain routine they were allowed to do. They were allowed to have like their families come aboard the boat to spend some time with them. And then the families had to go back to shore at a certain time, and then the crew would go to sleep. And the Confederate soldiers were supposed to always keep 1 or 2 soldiers on the boat at all times. Well, Robert Smalls was so good at his job and seemed so trustworthy to them that they were a little loose with the rules, because they didn't really think he was going anywhere, because he never gave them any reason to think that he would. And so they were a little loose, and they would prefer to sleep in town as opposed to sleeping on the boat. So they were like, whatever. And Robert Smalls picked up on this. And so one night when they did that, Robert Smalls sent the families back off the boat after their visit and said, I want you guys to meet us further down. We're leaving tonight. And so they left, I want to say around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And Robert Smalls had actually snatched the hat, or maybe stolen's a better word, but gotten the hat the captain wore, this distinctive hat. And Robert Smalls put it on his head. And so they start driving the boat out. There's no Confederate soldiers with them. There's nothing. But Robert Smalls had been doing this so long, he knew what the codes were. He knew what to say. And he also was able to imitate the voice of the captain. And so they go through these checkpoints. And I mean, if you haven't seen a picture of Robert Smalls, Smalls is a hilarious name for him. He is a big guy. And they were willing, that's why it had to happen at night, because you got this massive guy who's got dark skin, and he puts the hat on and is literally imitating the captain of this boat. But because it's so dark, they can't see him, but it sounds like the captain to the people doing the checkpoints. And he makes it through 6 checkpoints. He picks up his family and the crew's family at some point. And they go on their way, and they actually break out, and they get to where the Union blockade was, and they put up a white flag of surrender, and they surrender the ship to the Union soldiers. which the Union are like, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened. This is amazing. And so they're like, they're not sure what to do here. So they're like, well, you want to keep piloting this for us? And he's like, sure. And so he ends up piloting the ship for the Union, the same ship that he was piloting for the Confederates. And so there was like a bounty placed on his head. I mean, obviously the Confederates were really, really mad about what had happened. And he fought for the Union for the rest of the war. But what's so crazy is that, black soldier, or no, I don't want to get this wrong, but I don't remember if it was you weren't allowed to be black and serve in the Army, but you couldn't be black and serve in the Navy. Is that what I think it was? And so he basically had to pilot the boat as a civilian, even though he was clearly military. And I mean, the whole thing was nuts. I mean, at a certain point, like the Confederates, like they even contacted Washington and were like, hey, that was private property you guys took, so you're not going to give it back. You need to pay us for it. And they were like, Union was like, all right, we might pay you for the boat. And they were like, oh, well, we actually meant Robert too. We think we should pay for him too. And Union's like, man, pound sand. What are you talking about? And so he fights for them for the remainder of the war. And then this gets wild. After the war, no, not even after the war. What's wild was the Emancipation Proclamation. I didn't realize this. It only applied to southern states that were in rebellion. So when the Emancipation Proclamation came out, there were states where slavery was still allowed, like the state of Maryland, where I live. Slavery was still allowed. So Robert Smalls was actually traveling about in Maryland as a free man. And the whole South, the slaves had been freed. But states that were not in rebellion, because they couldn't be, like Maryland, slavery was still legal, even after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's just wild. And so, anyway, Civil War ends. The Union wins, for those that didn't know. And he wants to go back home, which, again, I want to say South Carolina or North Carolina. I can't remember which. But he goes back home, and he is trying to just reestablish his life. Everything's in chaos and disarray. I don't remember all the terms of it, but basically the Union was like, if you help the Confederacy, you're kind of screwed. And so people were having to sell off everything, and like their properties and all that. And it's just this wild turn of events. Robert Smalls ended up buying the house where he was enslaved as a kid. And so he went from being a boy that was a slave in this house to becoming the owner of that house. It's amazing. It's just such a wild, it doesn't even sound like a real story, but it is. And it's like, and then he ends up becoming a Congress member, ended up becoming pretty, I don't know if wealthy is the right word, but well off, definitely. And it's just an incredible story that I am not doing justice. So I highly, highly, highly recommend. I got two things I'm going to post in the link below. There's a YouTube channel, I think he's called The History Guy, that does a video on Robert Smalls that I highly recommend you watch. And then also the book, whose name I've forgotten because I referenced it 15 minutes ago. Be Free or Die, The Amazing Story of Robert Smalls' Escape from Slavery to Union Hero. It's incredible. It's an amazing story. It's like the quintessential American story. Like that's what I love so much about this guy, is that it's just the most American story you could conceive of. A guy is born a slave, steals a ship that he's piloting to fight for the Union, and then comes back, buys the house where he was a slave. Now he runs the joint, and and is successful, and it's an amazing story. A story that hopefully a lot more people will learn about and know about, and hopefully the movie's good. Oh, it would be so, because I when I was reading this guy's book, I was like, they have to make a movie about this guy. And it turns out they are. So I really hope it's good because it's an amazing story. So this is Randy with Dolan Cut and Trim. I know Black Friday is almost over. Black Friday. I know Black History Month is almost over. But I just wanted to share this story because it's just an incredible story and one that I think more people need to know. So have a good one.